Welcome back to the course, Cooperative Individualism, the Third Way to the Just Society. This is Lesson 13, Regulating How We Engage in Commerce. High on the list of contractual relationship issues is what sort of principles ought to govern the activities of businesses, particularly those that adopt a corporate form of ownership. We continue to struggle with the body of law that governs the formation, treatment, and dissolution of corporations. In return for the privileges granted under corporate charters, what obligations, if any, ought to be imposed on the corporate owners to act in a manner consistent with appropriate societal, that is, human rights objectives? Manufacturing businesses that have become multinational are de facto global citizens with little or no inherent commitment to the societies in which they happen to be incorporated. The transfer of productive facilities from one region or country to another is far easier today than ever before. Even most less developed countries have adequate infrastructure to accommodate the needs of industry. Corporate executives naturally and appropriately stay alert to locational opportunities where profit margins can be maximized because of much lower labor costs, lax environmental regulations, subsidized land and energy costs, and low taxes. For individual societies and corporations, and even for the labor force in a given society, the short-run result is often an expansion of employment opportunities, economic growth, and maintenance of or increase in profit margins. As has frequently been the case, however, the heavy subsidies and tax incentives granted have left the citizens of the host country with a net loss, particularly in terms of environmental destruction, threats to people's health, and loss of habitat for animals. While free and open trade benefits the world's consumers, there is good reason to discuss how a political party organized around a doctrine of human rights ought to respond to policies that embrace free trade but are in reality a means of securing exploitative arrangements. Under circumstances where there are more jobs searching for workers than workers searching for jobs, the aggregate result of the movement of production activities is greater efficiency and a net increase in purchasing power. Under existing conditions, where industries invest in new capital equipment or new locations with a net aggregate reduction in people employed, the longer run result is a concentration of purchasing power accompanied by an increase in structural unemployment among a broadening section of citizens. Governments' failure to adopt win-win policies in the regulation of production and commerce are traced to one major reason. In virtually every society, tax laws relating to property and income impose heavy costs on production, trade, and consumption, while favoring speculation and hoarding of building sites and natural resources, the selling price of which increases based on government's failure to collect in taxation the annual rental value of these assets. As the followers of Henry George have long understood, the single tax is society's liberator. The problem involves a failure of government at all levels, and today benefits most those corporations that function as industrial or financial landlords, meaning those controlling extremely valuable land in urban centers as well as tens of thousands, even millions of acres of forest, mining, agricultural, or grazing lands, without market-determined compensation to society for the monopoly privilege inherent in those titles. Industrial democracy, characterized by cooperatives and employee stock ownership programs, mitigate the problems created by land monopoly by allowing workers to participate in the distribution of income derived from capital and land ownership. Societal stability could be enhanced by more cooperative ownership of businesses, lessening the pressure on executives to pursue short-term profit maximization demanded by disinterested shareholders. Industrial democracy would also check the power of executives to compensate themselves in multiples hundreds of times greater than other employees. This approach to more responsible corporate behavior is far more desirable than relying on government to adopt intrusive regulatory or social legislation. At the same time, global competition and the revolution in computer and communications technology have greatly challenged traditional corporate hierarchies and decision-making processes. More than ever before, companies large and small must attract highly talented and motivated individuals able to adapt to constant change. Highly educated individuals have much greater expectations, not only in terms of compensation for their services, but in terms of stimulation, challenge, satisfaction, and sometimes a commitment to constructive societal change. Manufacturing industries have historically created many repetitive jobs and a much smaller number of stimulating career opportunities. Assisted by computer robotics and other technological advances, the output of goods from manufacturing and processing operations has rapidly expanded as a multiple of the direct labor component. To the extent that tedious, dangerous, and mind-numbing jobs are shifted to machines, this is a development to be applauded and encouraged. The dilemma, as discussed above, is that under current conditions, hundreds of millions of workers are faced with few alternative employment choices. Replaced by machines or left unemployed by the relocation of their jobs elsewhere, they become dependent on social welfare programs for a subsistence-level existence. The failure of one company, when that company represents a large portion of a region's employment base, can literally destroy communities altogether. In the United States and elsewhere, there is a long history of company towns that died when the natural resources to be exploited were eventually removed. Investors in China have in recent decades embraced speculation in land without any consideration of the viability of the projects undertaken. And if we build it, they will come strategy has resulted in one failed real estate development after another. The citizens and leaders of smaller communities in particular must learn how to diversify and eliminate dependence on just a few sources of employment. The balance is found when the community protects itself from the downside of the global economy while creating the appropriate socio-political climate in which businesses can operate profitably and without subsidy or monopolistic privilege. Economic theory recognizes that when societies impose taxes on production or on commerce, the net result is a reduction in those activities. The reason is that these taxes, which involve costs just for compliance, add to the cost of production that must be passed on to others if producers are to be profitable. Producers will attempt to pass on the added cost to their customers, and many external factors will determine whether or not this can be done. Among the variables are the level of demand, the availability of less costly substitutes, and the purchasing power of potential customers. What customers are willing to pay for most goods today results from a globally determined equilibrium between supply and demand. Thus, if taxes must be absorbed by the producer, profit margins will fall or disappear unless the producer is somehow able to otherwise reduce the cost of production. This may involve substituting new capital equipment for labor, imposing higher productivity objectives on labor, or if these strategies are ineffective, relocating or shutting down altogether. And on that, we've reached the end of Lesson 13.